Hi guys, thanks for checking out this channel. In today's video we're going to be showing you how to replace an immersion heater on your vented hot water cylinder. Okay, so on this particular job we've got an indirect vented hot water cylinder where the immersion heater has failed. The customer discovered that when they tried to use it as a backup for their hot water when their boiler broke down. So on this particular cylinder the immersion heater is located on the top. You may find that your immersion heater is located on the side, which would indicate your system is electric and it's probably direct, so you have no alternative hot water source. Now usually they'll be located one at the bottom, one halfway up. So the first thing you would need to do is identify which immersion heater is faulty. Usually it's quite simple, just by turning the power on to each one individually, and then you'll be able to identify the problem because one won't heat up your hot water. So before I start working on this immersion heater, I need to confirm that the electrics are safe. So I need to confirm I've got safe isolation, and I do that by turning off the power to the immersion heater itself and then checking it with a volt pen and also a voltmeter or a multimeter. Okay, with the cable safely isolated, we can now begin to look at removing the element itself. So at this stage, we're not actually going to be removing any of the water or draining it down at all. We actually want to leave the water in there while we start to loosen off this element here. Part of the reason we do that is because the water will help keep the integrity of the cylinder whilst we try to remove it. So inside the cylinder here, you've got a female thread which actually sticks up out of the main body of the copper cylinder, and without the water inside of it, that part can actually become quite weak. So as you start to loosen it by turning it anti-clockwise, if there's no water inside, it will actually, or could potentially, start to twist and actually split the cylinder itself. Okay, so right before I put my immersion heater spanner on, I always remove part of the insulation around the flange of the cylinder itself, where the element is housed. Now the reason I do that is just to ensure that once the new element is in location, we haven't got any water leak. So sometimes if your insulation jacket or your foam on your cylinder is covering this section, it's very difficult to see if you've got any leaks or not. So I've just scraped away a small section here, and that way I can make sure that it's totally tight when we're all finished. Okay, so this is the immersion heater spanner that we're going to be using. Now I prefer this style over the box type with the bar that goes through. I find these are a lot better at removing the immersion heaters, especially if you've got a stubborn one and you need to just give it a little tap there to remove it. So we'll get this on now and I'll show you the process of taking the old element out. Okay, I'm just locating the immersion heater spanner on the element itself. I need to put it in a position where I can tap the arm with a hammer to help me free the element up. Once the element's free, I'll then pinch it back up. I don't want any water leaking at this stage. And then that's confirmed that I can actually remove it from the cylinder, and then I can get it all drained down and replace it with a new one. Okay, that is now spinning. So now that I've freed this up, I'm just going to pinch it back on itself, like so, and that will stop the water coming out whilst we drain the cylinder. Okay, we're at the point now where we need to drain down the water going into your vented cylinder. Now, it's very tempting to use the gate valve which is on the cold water feed going into it. My advice is to not use this at all. The reason being, these are very prone to failing. They can sometimes get stuck in the off position, or they can sometimes leak when you actually begin to use them. So in this situation, we're not going to be using that at all. We've actually turned the cold water off to the cold water storage tank in the loft, and we're actually going to drain the whole system out now. Obviously, that isn't great in terms of saving water. There is an alternative where you could bung the bottom of the cold water storage tank, and that would prevent the water from coming out, but it is a little bit risky. So if you've got a gate valve like this on your cold water feed, I advise you not to use it. But if you've got a lever valve, which is like a quarter turn handle, then that should be absolutely fine. So that cold water pipe there is the one that feeds this hot water cylinder. Now stereotypically you would have a drain off on the cold water feed going into the bottom of the cylinder. Now you need to make sure you identify the right pipe, and that drain off there would be the one you stick your hose pipe on. Now unfortunately, the way this has been plumbed in, it's very difficult for us to actually get a spanner onto that. As you can see, it's extremely tight, tucked around the side. So luckily for us, in this situation, we're not going to have to put a hose pipe on here to drain the water off. There's actually a secondary hot water draw off pipe lower down than the element. So this connection here is where the hot water is drawn off for a shower. So we can run the shower through the shower pump, and as you can see, that will just lower the level in the tank below this entry point of the immersion heater, and we can take this out without any concerns of having a spillage. Okay, so now I've dropped the water level below the hole where the element enters, I can now begin to remove the element itself. So when you're removing these, you're just turning this anti-clockwise. Now, obviously you want to keep an eye on it just to make sure you're not getting water flying out the sides. In this case, we should be fine. Now you want to do this quite carefully. Like I say, the copper is quite fragile on the top of these cylinders, and obviously because of the age of the cylinder, we just need to take a bit of extra care. So once you get it loose, you should be able to start spinning it with your hand. You will start to notice probably the old fibre washer and any paste is going to start coming out. Right, let's get the tool back on because it is quite stiff still. Okay, that feels quite loose now. So, excellent. So, like I say, because we've dropped the water level, we've got no issue with water coming out. Now these are normally 27 inches. They're quite long, so you need room above it. And that's removed quite easily, like so. So there you go. And I don't know if you can see that, but that is where the element's fouled. You can see, look, it's all cracked there, and that's why it's tripping the electrics. So yeah, definitely time for a change. Now we've removed the element, we can take a good look inside the cylinder and check the integrity of this flange. Now, to be honest with you, this one's come out quite nicely. This flange here is already nice and smooth, but I would advise you to run some wire wool around this just to make sure the flat face of this part is nice and smooth. There's no sort of remnants of the old fibre washer, and just clean the thread a little bit with old paste and any debris, as that will aid you in securing the new element. Okay, this is the 27-inch immersion heater that we're going to be installing. It's all Incaloy, so that's suitable for a stainless steel cylinder should you require it. And the sealing method for it is the same as the old one. It's a fibre washer. Now, regarding the fibre washer, I always recommend pasting either side of it, so with some sort of plumbing paste or sealing paste, just to make sure you have no weeps at the end. And I apply that on this side of the washer and also on this side against this brass section, and that's never let me down. So I'll get this all pasted up and then I can start securing it into the cylinder. So we're all pasted up on the immersion heater, and I've also applied some plumbing paste to the thread itself and also on top of the flange. Now, yes, this probably is a bit overkill, but we only want to do this once. We don't want to fill this up and there be a little weep on the element. So that's it. So let's slide this down into position. Now you want to be really careful when you start winding this in that you're not cross-threading it. So don't put your tool on it straight away. Sometimes it can be a bit tricky to get the angle because you've got the weight of the element almost putting it off center to the thread. So it should spin quite easy like it is now. So I'm actually just tying it up really simply with my hand. Once that begins to pinch, I'll put my immersion or box spanner onto it. Now we've got to remember that the cylinder is still empty, so we don't want to over tighten it at this stage. We just want to pinch it up, and then once we've filled the cylinder back up, we can put the spanner on it and actually give it a good tightening up, and yeah, make sure we've got no leaks. Okay, so it's at this stage that you want to begin to turn the water back on. Now you don't want to wire the cable in first. If you get any weeps or small drips coming from the element, you won't be able to get your box spanner back on. So make sure everything's nice and tight and there's no leaks first, and then once you're happy, you'll be able to get your cable in position and fire it up. Okay, so once you're happy the element's totally watertight, you can begin to wire it in. Now most immersion heaters are fairly similar. You have a thermostat with built-in overheat capabilities, and all the connections are roughly in the same location. So your live will go into your thermostat here, your earth onto this earth rod, and then you usually have a neutral opposite this live terminal here that normally comes pre-wired. So it's obviously best to check your manufacturer's instructions, but most importantly, make sure your cable is nice and restrained. If there's any issues with the existing cable, you need to seek the advice of an electrician and have that replaced. So sometimes when an old immersion heater can become faulty, the cable can too. Okay, now we've got it all wired in, you need to just make sure that you've got the correct voltage going into your thermostat and make sure it is actually operating correctly. So what we want to do is we want to do earth to live going into the thermostat, just to confirm we've got 240 volts, and also correct polarity, which is earth to neutral, and then neutral to our live. So yeah, everything's working correctly. All I've got to do now is turn the power off and put the safety cover back on. Thank you very much for watching this video, and feel free to check out some of our other videos on our channel.